Good Tuesday evening, everybody. Rob O'Connor here from RobVenoSports.com. We're going to take a look back this week at some of the conference championship games, talk about the playoff seedings. Do we agree, disagree with the 4-in? And we'll also look ahead for our early look at some of the bowl games that will be played prior to Christmas Day. Lots to get to tonight. And to get to it all, we need to bring in Rob Veno, the founder of RobVenoSports.com. Rob, how are you this week?
I'm doing good tonight, Rob. How about yourself?
Doing really well. We saw quite a few games over the weekend that actually did live up to the hype, especially the Big Ten championship. And then we got the rankings on Sunday. Well, I mean, no doubt about it, Alabama number 1, Clemson goes to number 2, Ohio State, who did not play. I guess the committee punished them by moving them down to number 3. And then Washington sneaks in at number 4. And on the outside looking in is 2-loss Big Ten champion Penn State, who coincidentally handed Ohio State their only loss of the year. So I guess that's the first debate. Did Penn State deserve a spot in the Final Four, or did the committee get it right, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it's arguable each way, Rob. I mean, you and I did our podcast last week prior to the Tuesday night rankings coming out. And at that time, we knew, right? That was Tuesday afternoon, and we knew somebody's going to get left out. Somebody's going to be angry. There was just no way around it. And then when the rankings actually came out Tuesday night and had Washington slotted in the 4 spot, boy, off of what they did Friday night, it'd be very, very difficult to push them out. Obviously, Penn State has the argument for getting in. So, again, somebody was going to be angry. You know, the committee did, I guess, the best they could with it. But there's the argument now for, you know, maybe this particular year. In fact, you and I had talked about 8 slots this year. It would have been a nice 18 deal this year, but even 6 would have been nice too. So we have what we have. I don't think I could be too definitive in an argument either way, but I think you could legitimately make cases once again for the Washington side, for the Penn State side. Some people can even make the argument for the Michigan side, which lost 2 games on the last play of the game. What we have now, Rob, is we have games with point spreads on them, and that's what we have to deal with now.
Absolutely. The one thing I did say, and being from the Philadelphia area, I'm friends with quite a few Penn State graduates, and a few of us were talking, and I pointed out to them, I actually believe going to the Rose Bowl is probably a better situation for Penn State. They're going into a game, they're 7.5-point underdogs at the moment, but they're going into a game that I feel they have a legitimate shot to be competitive and win in. I don't think if they got that 4 seed and had to go play Alabama down in the Georgia Dome and their SEC country, that it would have ended well for them. You look what happened to Michigan State last year. They got absolutely embarrassed by Alabama, and the program did not do well this year. They're not even going to a bowl game. I think that Penn State getting to the Rose Bowl, building some confidence, bringing a lot of guys back next year will really set them up to compete again in what's going to be a very tough Big Ten division there with Ohio State and Michigan. Any thoughts on that angle of it?
Well, I think it's a great point. It's an absolute great point. In fact, I had this discussion yesterday. I can't remember exactly with who, but hey, if you're Penn State, did you really want a piece of Alabama anyway? It's all right to, off of Saturday night's win, be beating your chest and feel like you could take on anybody and you match up with anybody on the field. But I don't know if that's the case. You would much rather go to the Rose Bowl, which, hey, there's just a ton of prestige for a Big Ten, Pac-12 Rose Bowl, always has been, so it's a great place, great bowl game, like you say. game is more competitive, I feel, against USC. It's a game that Penn State actually could win. But the Alabama game, it leads me back to to my other thought, Rob, yesterday, which was, isn't it just Alabama and the other three at this point? Does Washington really even want Alabama? They're so much better than everybody else right now. I've never had a team power rated this high in 20 years. The fact that they're a 14.5-point favorite right out of the chute is just crazy in what's supposed to be the four best teams in the country. So Penn State's probably in a much better place right now. You could be angry that they didn't get in, the Penn State alumni, the fan base, the media, I'm sure. But, hey, I agree with you. They're in a better place going to the Rose Bowl.
Absolutely. And you look at the 2-3, Clemson and Ohio State. We'll get to the playoff games in a week or two. We'll talk about them. We'll break them down in depth. So let's just play it safe and assume Alabama wins. Assuming no major injuries for either side in the Clemson Ohio State game, which of those two teams do you think has a better chance to knock off Alabama in the title game?
Yeah, my feeling would be Clemson. They saw them last year, and they were, decided underdogs last year. And what they did, I don't think anybody expected, in the perspective that they scored 40 points. I think anybody expected Clemson to put 40 on Alabama last year. If they played them this year, I don't think anybody would expect that this year either. Alabama's defense looks to be even better. But, it's a core group, especially on offense. Mike Williams didn't even get to play in that game last year for Clemson. He was injured all year. So I think that they're probably better prepared than an Ohio State team, which, in my opinion, Rob, they kind of lack where the forward pass is concerned. And if you're going to be one-dimensional and only run the football or be consistent in your ability to run the football against Alabama, Nick Saban's going to take that away, and it'll be a long day for J.T. Barrett and company. So Ohio State's defense might be better than Clemson's and might be able to contain Alabama a little bit better. But, to project it out, you have to almost figure that Ohio State 3-and-outs would keep their defense on the field quite a bit in that game. So I would go with Clemson as the better match. I don't think anybody can beat Alabama at this point in time, but certainly I think Clemson would give them the better game.
I would agree with that as well. I think Deshaun Watson is a playmaker, somebody that can make a difference on their own. I think Clemson's the more experienced team. You got to remember, this Ohio State team is still relatively young compared to Clemson, compared to Alabama. And, you say Alabama's got a true freshman quarterback, but I think by this time of the season, all those labels are gone. You can forget it. He's not a true freshman anymore. He's a well-tested quarterback. He's won some big games in some tough environments. And let's talk a little bit about the Alabama win against Florida. They come out of the gate. Florida goes up 7-0. Alabama goes 3-and-out. Alabama goes kick 6. Alabama gives Florida the ball back. They pick off another pass, score again before their offense had really done anything. It's amazing how many different ways Alabama can beat a football team.
Boy, and that's not the first time this season that we saw them overcome simply with their defense scoring points. I think back to the Ole Miss game where Chad Kelly and company had a sizable lead in the Alabama defense, and special teams made all the difference in the world in that one. There was one or two others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head right now where defense and special teams were a big factor in Alabama winning the football game. So, that's just an added thing. It's almost to the point now, Rob, where you have to handicap or factor in the potential for Alabama to put 7, 10 up on the board without even looking to their offense. And it helps Jalen Hurts and the Alabama offense out because Hurts, throwing-wise, he can be inconsistent at times, and the offense isn't always top-notch. But boy, when you have that, I think they had -5 yards offense, yet they held the lead in the first quarter in that game after the blocked kick. Just crazy, but they've shown the capability to do that all season long. They force you into bad spots, and certainly Austin Appleby fell into a couple of those after getting the opening drive touchdown. It's probably another reason why Deshaun Watson and Clemson are the better opponent for Alabama, because they're so balanced offensively. They can run it, they can throw it, and Watson, of course, has the capability of being a running quarterback at times. So those three things, I don't know that any other team inside the playoff right now has all three offensive options as good as Clemson does. It happened to Florida. You can't run the football. I think they ran for 0 yards in that game. First time ever in SEC championship or that no yards were gained by the rushing attack of a team. So Alabama, they just are what they are. They're very, very good. They're exceptional on the defensive side of the football, and they're more than capable on the offensive side.
Now we look at their opponent, Washington. They are coming off a very impressive 40-10 win over Colorado. Definitely did enough to warrant keeping the 4 seed. I don't see how you can drop a team after that kind of win against a very high-quality Colorado opponent. You got Browning at quarterback, got some good offensive weapons to work with. What do you see Washington being able to do? What kind of game plan do they need to put together? Obviously, we know it's going to be, they got to win the turnover battle. They're going to need a special teams touchdown. They're going to need a short field. But what can they do offensively to score some points against this Alabama defense?
Yeah, the one thing about them is they are diverse offensively, and they do have threats in the receiving game, especially John Ross, and they do have a two-headed monster at running back. They use Gaskin kind of as the breakaway home run threat guy, and then Coleman is the punishing type back. Both very good at what they do. But against a good Colorado defense, last Friday night in that Pac-12 championship game, Jake Browning, the quarterback, played horrendously. 9 of 24 throwing the football. I wonder how he'd be against the Alabama defense. I think when you're trying to point at things that Washington needs to do to win a game, I think one of the biggest assets that night when they play Alabama will be the fact that Chris Peterson is their head coach. And you remember Chris Peterson from his Boise State days. He'll pull out everything. And you might need a couple of trick plays to beat Alabama, right? Somehow confuse them, get them mixed up, have them with their ears pinned back thinking they've got you by the horns, and then, some type of misdirection or some type of flea flicker that catches them just coming upfield. Those things, fake punts, all that stuff. Peterson's got, the Santa Claus bag full of them. And I think that'll be important for Washington when they play Alabama. You probably have to have one or two of those successful trick plays in that game. Defensively, they're pretty stout, Washington is. I don't think that they'll get run over by Alabama. Their defense has been good for 2 years now. Believe me, last year it wasn't supposed to be good when Chris Peterson took over. He made it good, and this year they've become even better. Obviously, Sefa Leufau wasn't at 100% health in that contest. He got knocked out. He came back, and as soon as he came back in the third quarter, he threw 2 picks immediately. One went back to the end zone for 7, and the other one led to 7 more, I think. So, but Washington did the damage there. They got to the quarterback. They forced Leufau out of the game. It's a good defense. Once again, though, Rob, I think that, they'll have to be steady on the defensive end, and maybe it takes a trick play or two. And I like the fact that Chris Peterson would be the guy designing those trick plays.
Well, I guess Ohio State obviously didn't play. They didn't make their championship game, so we really didn't get one more look at them. But I think we saw in the Michigan game against Michigan, that they've got a very good defense. Their defense won them that game with a pick 6 and then another pick for a very short field. And the offense did enough to get by against a very good Michigan defense. Clemson ton of offense. They scored, I think, 42 against Virginia Tech, but the defense kept letting Virginia Tech hang around. What does Clemson have to do defensively to improve? They've had a couple of those games this year where they're just giving up way too many points and not getting off the field.
Yeah, it's their Achilles heel. There's no doubt about it, and it's what made today's Frank Broyles Award even more questionable to me, as Brett Venables, the defensive coordinator for Clemson, won the Assistant Coach of the Year award. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, really? Brett Venables? I've seen Clemson absolutely hammered at times. We think back to the Pittsburgh game, right? 43 points there. We just saw Virginia Tech go crazy. There's been more than a couple of instances where Clemson hasn't been good defensively this season. The Louisville team scored a lot of points against Clemson. So a little bit of a head-scratcher there. That's kind of off topic, but just triggered a thought here. For Ohio State, you know, what's great about them, Rob, is the pass defense. What a matchup that's going to be, right? Clemson marches out 4 terrific receivers, and Ohio State's got all those young D-backs, and that's going to be the matchup of the night. Can Clemson's receivers get separation against the Ohio State defensive backfield? That defensive backfield has not seen – they played Oklahoma early in the season. I'm not sure that Oklahoma – in fact, I could almost definitively say Oklahoma doesn't have the receiving weapons in quantity that Clemson does. Clemson's got quality guys and depth of them. So I think it's a real test for Ohio State. I don't think they've seen anything like it all season long. Certainly when you go through their division, Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, the teams that they played in the Big Ten, even on the other side, nowhere near what Clemson has in the throwing game. So that's going to be the test for Ohio State. I think if you line those guys up fundamentally and you have a real opinion on which group can win that battle, then I think you play that side. If you think Clemson's receivers are going to give Ohio State's defensive backs all they can handle, you play Clemson. If you think Ohio State can keep them quiet, then you play Ohio State, because Wayne Gallman almost becomes complimentary at times for Clemson. And I know in the Virginia Tech game, they went an awful lot to Deshaun Watson and his running ability. The quarterback on those read option plays became a big part of the Clemson scoring and their consistent flow of offense in that contest. So Ohio State will have to be prepared for that too. It's an interesting game. It really is. Ohio State, as much as I talked earlier about them probably not being able to penetrate the Alabama defense, there's a pretty good shot that J.T. Barrett and company can do enough on the ground against Clemson to open up some stuff through the air. I don't think you can do that against Alabama if you're Ohio State, but against Clemson I think it's possible. And then the question just becomes, is Barrett going to connect on passes when he has opportunities, or is he going to miss? He's kind of a hit or miss type of quarterback throwing the football. Urban Meyer's a great coach. I know he'll come with a great game plan, but nobody's been involved in more of these games, these type of high-profile games the last couple of years than Clemson has. So Ohio State's not catching anybody off guard here. I think that for Ohio State it'll be tough, but I think it all lies in the defensive backfield. If that defensive backfield comes up big and keeps Clemson's receiving core quiet, then they're going to win the game. If it goes the other way, Clemson will win that game.
Well, Rob, that's some good initial analysis, and in a couple of weeks we'll really get into it and break it down against the spread as we kind of see where the line ends up settling, and as we get a little more updates on injury situations for both teams, of course. Let's jump to some off-the-field action for a few minutes. It's been a busy time with the coaching carousel, so to speak. The big one today, Matt Rule to Baylor. Your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say that my first thought was, how is Matt Rule, or what are his connections to recruiting Texas? Now, I don't know. I didn't see, Rob, if he's taking the entire staff with him, or if he's going to build a staff, or if he's going to retain some guys on the Baylor staff. I don't know exactly how that's going to go, but You have to be able to recruit the state of Texas. We'll see Matt Rule's connections are directly to the East Coast here. To me, that was interesting. And then, of course, the other one that hits you right away is the fact that Baylor is going to become a totally different team. We are not going to see any totals on Baylor games listed in the 80s anymore. Matt Rule is going to come in, the air raid's going to go out, and in comes a more conservative style offense like we saw with Temple, and a gritty, tough defense, which absolutely stopped Navy in their tracks on Saturday to win the AAC championship. So, yeah, there's a couple of things there. The third thing I guess you could say
to you,
yeah,
obviously the recruiting is a big point, but what are your thoughts on Baylor abandoning the track meet style offense in a league that's got teams that can play that way? Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, West Virginia. I mean, is this nail down, hunker down defense going to play in the Big 12, and is he going to be able to do enough offensively? There's still going to be games where he's going to need 35, 38 points to win.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the truth, Rob, and that's what makes this kind of at least intriguing from the outset. I don't know what his assistant coaching staff is going to look like. I can't imagine that he keeps Kendall Briles on as offensive coordinator. Now, could he go and get an air raid style offensive coordinator? He could. We watched enough Matt Rule. I don't see that happening here. One of two things is going to happen. The Big 12 is a league where if you can play any defense, you win. Let's face it, Kansas State head coach Bill Snyder goes in with kind of a Matt Rule type of approach at Kansas State, right? They're a conservative football team, fundamentally sound, play defense first, and K-State just doesn't get the athletes to Manhattan, Kansas. A lot of times they've gone the JC route more than they have the recruiting route, high school recruiting route, in order to get guys. At Baylor, if Matt Rule can recruit, he's going to get better athletes and play a higher level brand of Kansas State football, so to speak, which could be good. It could be trend-setting in that league. Who knows? As far as coming from the AAC, I'd have to look. I don't know if he's faced Tulsa because that's a cross-divisional thing, right? But inside his own division, he has seen the high-tempo offense of South Florida. Temple hasn't been tremendously successful at stopping South Florida, but Matt Rule has seen these types of spreads inside his own league because that league has become, especially on the western side, just a host of spread offense. We can remember Temple playing SMU, and that game went 60-40 or something a couple of years back. So he's had looks at it in principle. We'll see if he can handle it defensively. I think the bigger thing for Baylor, maybe the bigger picture of all, Rob, has nothing to do with football, just has the purpose of bringing a little bit of sanity back to the Baylor program. Right here you have Matt Rule, a guy who recruits excellent kids. He's not going to get these troublemakers, and Baylor wants to clean up their program. So on that note, it's probably one of the best hires they could make, and maybe that's what they saw in Matt Rule above all else. Let's just get somebody in here who's a winner, who's got a disciplined style, who's going to clean up our program, who doesn't carry any excess baggage into the program. I think maybe that might have been the bigger thing for Baylor here.
Yes, the other big one, I know we covered Texas and LSU last week. I guess the other big program that's come open since we last talked is Oregon. What do you make of that situation?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, everything we read about it so far, first of all, Oregon made a huge push for Matt Rule and lost the battle to Baylor, which is interesting in itself. I don't know. Obviously, none of us know what the particulars were, what the offer was from Oregon, what the offer was from Baylor, but it's hard for me to believe that Oregon could lose any financial battle with the Nike money behind them than to anybody across the country. So Matt Rule chose Baylor for a reason. He didn't choose Oregon. So now Oregon's left with, a couple of decent options here. We'll see which route they go. They want to have something in place maybe by the weekend or next Monday from what I read, because obviously recruiting is a big deal at this point. But they have to do something there, too, to restore that brand and that program, Oregon, because what happened this year just can't happen. I think of the names I've read, Rob, and they haven't interviewed P.J. Fleck yet, but maybe P.J. Fleck would be an outstanding candidate for the Oregon job. Full of energy, sort of, embodies the Nike type of atmosphere and the Oregon atmosphere. And I think that maybe they could go that route. I know they're scheduling an interview with him, so that could be an option, a way that they go. But we'll see. They're going to get somebody that they feel comfortable with. For me, I think that Fleck would be a real good choice.
I think the first, this is kind of a two-part question here for you. Obviously, the biggest name in coaching out there right now, at least as far as I'm concerned, is Les Miles. And right now, there's not that premier opening for him. So, first part is, do you see anything else opening up in terms of premier programs, whether it's Tennessee making a move or whether it is Notre Dame making a move, or do you, and if anything does open up, do you see Les Miles sliding in anywhere?
Well, the latest news as of today is Les Miles is real high on Houston's list to take the place of Tom Herman. That job, it looks as if, I don't want to say it's his if he wants it, because they've also interviewed Lincoln Riley, the offensive coordinator out of Oklahoma, who would be a nice choice for Houston to keep that. Those are two different offensive minds that you're talking about there, Les Miles and Lincoln Riley, obviously a disciple of Mike Leach and the air raid offense. But another name keeps kicking in there, and Lane Kiffin's name is bandied about at Houston, too. So imagine those three guys. It could become a whole high-profile war between Miles and Kiffin. But that's where I've seen Les Miles' name connected most recently to the Houston program.
I guess here's my question to you. If you're a Lane Kiffin, you've coached at USC, and you've coached at Tennessee, and now you have a very good offensive coordinator gig at Alabama, or you're Les Miles and you're coming from the SEC and the LSU, isn't going to the American Athletic Conference kind of a step backwards for those guys? Are they taking it because that's what's open, or is that where they really want to be?
It's funny because Tom Herman almost put Houston on the map earlier this year as kind of that big-time program stuck in a non-Power 5 group after he beat Oklahoma. And remember, earlier in the year, with all the talk about Big 12 expansion, Houston was kind of at the forefront of that. Let's add Houston. I know a couple of either ADs or head coaches, athletic departments inside the Big 12 didn't really want to bring Houston in, but Houston was bandied about quite a bit. And when they played against Oklahoma early on, there was a little added incentive in that game for the Houston Cougars to prove that, hey, we can play in your league. If you're going to expand, take us. And now we've seen the Big 12 has stopped expansion talk, right? So
TV money put a stop to that.
Yeah, and so now, I don't know. You're absolutely right that going to the American Athletic Conference is a step backwards. Can you build a power program there and maybe find your way into a league in the future, or can you build a power program there that ends up in New Year's Six bowl every single year, which is a high-profile bowl game, and maybe use it as a stepping stone. It's possible. I think the money's going to have a lot to do with it. Apparently, Houston's ready to unload the bank to buy out Lane Kiffin. So it depends what the coach has in his mind, what they really are looking for here. But those are the three names right now that are really
I would think of between Kiffin and Miles, I would think that Houston's probably a better fit for Kiffin simply because Kiffin's gone some places and has really kind of failed. He didn't do a whole lot at USC or Tennessee to lead anybody to believe he can be a huge superstar coach like a Nick Saban or Urban Meyer. He's not in that class. I mean, he could go cut his teeth a little bit more there. I just find it hard to believe that somebody who has the proven track record of success as Les Miles does, and who really didn't do anything wrong at LSU other than he got a snap off a second too late against Auburn, and he got fired because they were kind of just tired of his accent speak. But I would really think that would be a step backwards for him being such a proven coach.
Yeah, I think I'll take the point about Lane Kiffin because I've made this myself, and I totally agree with you. In my perception of Lane Kiffin is a guy that, you know, he's kind of hidden in the shadows of Nick Saban, right? When we talk about Alabama, we talk about Nick Saban first. We don't talk about Lane Kiffin all that much, despite the fact that he's brought their offense out of the Stone Age and into the 2000 teens here, and they're a very, very formidable offense now with capabilities from the spread and other things that Nick Saban wasn't doing back then. My perception of him is that his ego tells him he's a head coach. He's not an offensive coordinator. He's a head coach. So he would probably like to assume the head coaching job at Houston, run things his way, be successful, and use that as a stepping stone to something else. From that, using that as a foundation, I would agree with you. Yes, it makes way more sense for Kiffin than it does for Miles, unless Miles just does not want to be out of the game and, maybe coach somewhere 1 year and see what openings happen next year and just bounce a 1-year deal. I'm not sure, but I do agree with you that the position itself at Houston makes more sense for Lane Kiffin, and I think Lane Kiffin probably wants it quite a bit. I really do believe this guy feels he's a head coach, not an assistant coach. So we'll see who Houston chooses, where the whole thing takes them. There's other things available here, but they're not high profile. Like you say, the Cincinnati job is open now that Tommy Tuberville stepped down. We'll see what happens there.
The Temple job is open.
Temple's open. Yeah, you know what? And I know because we're in the Philly area, we see the Philadelphia reports, but how about the cries from the Philadelphia media for Charlie Strong here at Temple? That's kind of interesting, too.
I mean, I think that he would be a great coach for Temple. I'm just not sure they're going to be able to get him.
That's the problem because you would think that with Temple's resources, even though they probably walked into a little more money the past couple of years by being in championship games for the conference and by being in bigger bowl games now. But still, you wonder if they can afford it. Charlie Strong, what the heck? He comes from Louisville money, from Texas money, and now to Temple. It doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense financially. We'll see where they go. If they're looking assistant coaches, there's going to be plenty of them because a lot of staffs are getting cleared right now. We'll see. But like I say, Cincinnati, Temple, there's P.J. Fleck's going to leave and Western Michigan's going to come open. So there's going to be stuff, but nothing, like you said, nothing really high profile for Les Miles to go ahead and look at.
Well, Rob, let's move to some games. We've only got one this weekend. Army-Navy. Army was on a bye week last week, and then they have their final regular season game Saturday. Navy in the unusual situation of playing for the AAC title against Temple, lost a couple of guys to some pretty serious injuries, and now they got to come back and play their biggest rivalry game after the disappointment of seeing the New Year's Six Bowl slip through their hands. What do you see happening here? Are they going to be able to get themselves back up and overcome the injuries, or is Army finally going to have some success against Navy?
I think situationally, Rob, this is as good a spot as Army's been in quite a few years. We know Navy's dominated this series for a long, long time now, but for Army, which is a good football team this year, and the fact that they're on a double bye, they'll have had 2 weeks to prepare for this game for Army while Navy was busy preparing for Temple, and they had visions of Cotton Bowl in their head, and now here they come on Sunday after they've lost all of that, and also lost their starting quarterback, Will Worth, who, by the way, if we go through just statistical numbers that Will Worth put on the board this year for Navy, and remember that heading into this season, Navy had lost Keenan Reynolds to graduation, but they had Tago Smith in waiting, and everybody, from what we saw of Tago Smith last year in limited action, thought Tago Smith could come in and be a very good replacement. He goes down, and Will Worth takes over, and it seemed as if the sky had fallen on Navy. Will Worth put up statistical numbers this season that could actually rival somewhat those of Lamar Jackson if people were paying attention. So that kind of loss, and he's gone for the year, so he's not going to play here, and he won't play in their bowl matchup. That's huge for them. They go with Zach Abey now. We saw Zach Abey come in against Temple early second quarter when Worth went down. Offense went nowhere. Temple held Navy to 168 yards rushing in that contest. Army doesn't present Temple's defense, but we know that this could be a down type. I even hate to say that because it's still Army-Navy, and the rivalry is so big that you don't think there would be a letdown. But the situation is so weird. It's never happened this way before. So I'll be interested to see how the Navy kids bounce back with a couple of huge injuries here. Gully, the slot back, by the way, gone for the year as well. So we saw a lot of action early on the Army side, and it continued today. This game has gone from an opener of 10 all the way down to 6. Navy has lost 4 points off the number in just a couple of days. We're only at Tuesday here, so Army has a 6.5 point dog at this point in time. Maybe you think it's too short, but maybe, like we say, when we start comparing or when we start tallying injuries plus situation, to me it's a difficult spot for Navy. We'll see. I'm going to look into it more as the week rolls on. It's going to be real cold here over the weekend, too. We'll see what the weather does as far as that game is concerned. Total's been pushed all the way down from 55.5 to 47. You had an 8.5 point move on the total, 4 point move on the game. I think it shows you the respect that the sharp bettors have for Will Worth at quarterback for Navy and what his loss means to that team.
Yeah, I guess it will be a good one to watch Saturday. I can say I'm looking forward to it. I think it will be a competitive game. I myself have not firmed up which direction I'm going in. A slight lean towards the Army side at the moment, but the line obviously getting away from the value. Let's talk about a couple of bowl games. We might end up even doing another podcast before these games are even played, but let's just talk about a few of the bigger pre-Christmas bowls. I think opening day, there's a slate of, 4 games. The one that stands out to me is I think the Houston-San Diego State game in the Las Vegas Bowl is going to be a very good football game. Obviously, Houston with a little bit of coaching turmoil, and they're not going to have Tom Herman for the game. But still a good football team. San Diego State, a very good football team as well. Mountain West Conference champions. Have you had a chance to look at that one yet?
Yeah, and we're talking real early here, Rob, because there's not even totals printed on these or posted on these games yet. All we have is lines that were or that opened yesterday. So we're talking real early, but just generally speaking in this contest, you talk about the Houston coaching situation. That's always one that's used at bowl time when, teams have lost their head coach and will be going with an interim head coach. You want to know where that interim coach, where the team sits with that guy, so you have to look into that. I think the venue here, this is a Las Vegas game, so San Diego State's more familiar with the venue. For San Diego State, it's a one-dimensional team. Obviously a great rushing football team with Donnell Pumphrey, who has set all kinds of records at the school level, at the national level, running for this team. The guy who's next in line, Rashad Penny, for San Diego State, just a bigger, faster version of Pumphrey, so they certainly have a 1-2 combination there that could cause Houston some trouble. We always worry, about motivation in these early bowl games, Rob. Do teams really want to be there? Which one does, which one doesn't? So a lot of times this becomes more of a research-type deal, quote reading, press conference watching, see who really wants to be there. I think at face value, Houston's the better team. They're a 3.5-point favorite. Don't know if they're thrilled to be there or not, so it's hard to make a call on that one at this point in time. And we have yet to see a total, like I said earlier. We'll see where that ends up.
Well, Rob, you do make a point. It is a little early, and there's a couple other good ones, but I think we're going to get back to them before the holidays. So just a couple of general questions here, and we'll wrap it up for this early look. The first question is, other than the New Year's Six and those playoff bowl games, what bowl game are you most looking forward to watching this year? I mean, which one do you think they really picked a great matchup for?
Well, if you talk to me, you're talking to somebody who thinks every bowl game is a great game, so I'm the wrong guy to ask. But I get where you're going with the question. Let's just start. From the minor bowl game perspective, Rob, let's start with the minor ones and what might just be a great matchup, or where I think that the specific bowl committee drew themselves a great matchup. On December the 20th, Memphis is going to play Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky is going to have the coaching issue as well. Jeff Brom accepted the Purdue head coaching job, right? But they're going to come in with an assistant coach, and Western Kentucky is one of those offenses that just rolls on, whether they have their head coach there or not. Mike White, the quarterback for Western Kentucky, a South Florida transfer, has picked up for Brandon Dowdy like it was yesterday. That may be one of the most, if not the most, explosive game of the early bowl holiday season, maybe the entire bowl season. If you love points and you love offense, you'll want to watch Memphis against Western Kentucky. I think that bowl committee got themselves a heck of a game. If Navy had been totally healthy, Louisiana Tech Navy would have been a great game as well. If you move down the card a few days, you'll come across one of those mid-tier games with West Virginia and Miami of Florida. I think that's a great game. It's a great matchup. West Virginia, Rich Rodriguez against Miami of Florida. Mark Richt, who this year, that squad made some real advancement, especially on the defensive side of the football. They've got offensive weapons. We know West Virginia was one of the Big 12's top threats this year. I think those two teams match up so well that ought to be a great game also. I think one more before we get to the real big ones. If you take a look at the Oklahoma State-Colorado game, that should be fantastic, a rematch of old Big 8 foes. Oklahoma State certainly can push any team with their offense. Colorado, we'll see how they react to the loss in the Pac-12 championship game, whether they get right back up on the horse or whether they kind of sulk their way into that bowl game. Florida State, Michigan should be a fantastic game. Jim Harbaugh's crew against Jimbo Fisher's. Those two teams, I think, by most early on, considered to be two of the 5 best in the country. So you get a great matchup in a non-New Year's Day game. So those two teams, Michigan right now listed as a 7-point favorite, but I think that can be a real good one. And then the last one I'll give you, we've already talked about USC Penn State and how we think that'll be a good game. But the last one I'll give you is the Auburn-Oklahoma game. That has all the makings of a really, really good matchup, right down to the wire. So I think all of those will be interesting. And we'll go through a bunch more, like you say, as time goes on. I think as we research it more, we'll find more that we like. But for now, I think those are probably some of the ones that strike me at face value.
Well, I think you definitely hit on one that I really liked, the Oklahoma State-Colorado game. I think Arkansas-Virginia Tech is going to be a good game as well in the Belk Bowl, also on the 29th. It's the lead-in game to Oklahoma State and Colorado. Arkansas showed some flashes of true success this year. Beat Ole Miss, beat Florida, finally started to come around, and then they go and have an embarrassing end-of-season loss to Missouri. It'll be interesting to see how they rebound in that one. And then I think one of the biggest games, if nothing happens between now and the bowl game, and Tennessee comes out and loses their bowl game in Nashville to Nebraska, I think you can put a fork in Butch Jones at that point in time.
You know what? And we talked earlier about Les Miles, and that could be something that Coach Miles sits back and just surveys the situation and sees if that's exactly what happens. Because I would agree with you. Tennessee needs a victory as much as any team in this bowl season. And if Butch Jones loses that one, could be the end of the road for him. So we'll see.
Well, Rob, I think we've got a good grasp. Final question for you is, and you hinted at it a little bit in one of your earlier answers, what do you look for when you are trying to handicap these bowl games against teams that sometimes play two very different styles of football and are very unfamiliar with each other? You're not handicapping Alabama, LSU here. You're handicapping teams that don't ever see each other, they don't play each other, and they do get a lot of time to prepare for each other, but there's always all kinds of outside noise and situations going on for a lot of these teams. So how do you just kind of handicap your way through all of that?
Well, the first thing, especially, and I hit on it earlier, is you're always looking for teams that want to be there. What's the motivational factor on each side of the coin here? It used to come into play an awful lot, Rob, with huge favorites, double-digit favorites in early bowl games. Just by definition, a double-digit favorite in a minor bowl game is a disappointed team. You had bigger aspirations on the season. You end up where you end up, and who really wants to be, in Tucson on December 17th, those types of things. So we're always looking for those situations. There's not that many this year that present themselves from that angle. So maybe that's an angle that's unusable so far this year. The second thing you would look for, we talked about it a little bit, these teams like Air Force, nobody really wants to draw in a bowl game. Teams that run the option offense, it's just so difficult to prepare for. And even though you get the 15 extra practice sessions, you've seen time and time again where those styles of teams can come out and create havoc, at least for one half, until the team can adjust. So you are looking for polar opposites that can have an edge, especially on the offensive side of the football. Aside from that, if you can get equal motivation, if you can line up your fundamentals and handicap those, strengths versus weaknesses, you can probably pick yourself an awful lot of winners. I think the totals nowadays in some of these bowls become a lot easier, although odds makers are getting so sharp with the totals, especially this year, Rob, where we saw more higher level totals than we've seen in quite some time. I mean, it becomes difficult to play these things over anymore. But the last 3-4 years, boy, it's been a pretty easy thing to go ahead and bet some overs where you get something in maybe the high 50s, low 60s minor bowl game where teams are just going to let it rip. And I know for myself, I mean, the record the last 2 years, 27-1 picking bowl game overs is almost, even reading the newspaper ahead of time and seeing the final scores ahead of time, it'd be hard to go 27-1. So that just goes to show you the advantages that were presented. I'm real interested to see where they put these numbers this year, because they seem to try and deter over bettors at this point in time, make them so high that you can't play them. Still, we wind up with our share of 55-52 games, don't we? Anybody who watched Western Kentucky and Louisiana Tech last Saturday knows that offense prevails in modern-day college football. So it's just a battle against the number, and we'll see. Read up. Best advice I could ever give is just research these games, read as much as you can, especially for the early bowls, and check motivation. That's usually a big key to winning, especially with side betting in bowl games.
Well, Rob, I think we've said a lot. We've laid a good foundation for the bowl season to come. Of course, get over to Veno, sports.com, all the handicapping information that you need, weather reports, injury updates, power rankings, Rob's projected lines compared to where they open and where they move. It's really a great resource. Plus, of course, plays from Derek, myself, Rob Veno. There's a lot to look at over there, so be sure to get to RobVenoSports.com. Rob, it's been a good one. I enjoyed it. Hope you did as well.
We love this time of year, Rob. Absolutely, we love this time of year.
And I'm looking forward. We'll get back at it next week. Maybe we'll have some totals, especially for the pre-Christmas games, to take a look at. And then we'll get back with each other closer to the New Year's 6 games and the college playoff and break all of that down. Until next time, for Rob Veno, I'm Rob O'Connor. Thanks for listening.